like 90% of the benefits for just 10% of the costs, and that's basic like what we're trying to do. Just to automate it only to a point that doesn't require us to basically take away the flexibility from you and make it like not configurable.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Coder Career with me, Cameron Blackwood. Today's guest is Matu Kongradi. Matu is the CEO and founder of Stacktape, which is essentially a DevOps as a service platform allowing you to leverage the power of AWS with as much configuration or as little configuration as you need. The whole idea behind Stacktape is that you no longer need to be a DevOps expert to leverage the full power of the cloud. As such, no matter your skill level as an engineer, you'll definitely find this episode useful. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to share it with a friend, and if you are currently looking for a role in tech, do check out my new website, Startup Grad Jobs. We feature both the best technical and non-technical roles in startups and scale-ups across the UK. And now, on with the show. Hey Matu, thanks so much for joining me. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, and I'm doing fine. What about you?
Yeah, not bad, thanks. Not bad. Can't complain. We had a bit of a Eurovision party at my rugby club on Saturday night, and my throat is still a bit sore. But the UK didn't do very well, sadly. But it's a good excuse to like have a few drinks and all the rest of it.
Well, I've just returned from my friend's bachelor's party, so yeah, I'm not feeling the greatest either. So yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Understandable. Well, hopefully we'll bring the tone up a little bit with some very exciting stuff that we've got to discuss today. So for anyone who hasn't come across you before in the audience, who are you and what do you do day to day at the moment?
I'm currently a founder and CEO at Stacktape. I will tell you more about Stacktape in a bit, but maybe some background about me. So yeah, I've worked as a full stack developer in multiple startups and from multiple companies, and so I've been also every time I've been the one that had to deal with the infrastructure stuff, even though I wasn't the one that was like trained for it. So I just I've basically in every company that I worked for, I ended up doing it myself, and just trying to make sense of everything from configuring like Docker containers to configuring infrastructure on AWS and jumping through 22 open tabs with AWS documentation and trying to make sense of everything. But yeah, and so that's why basically I've started I've decided to create a Stacktape and basically make this DevOps stuff more accessible to developers.
Very nice. And I guess that brings me quite nicely into my first real question is about you're saying about being a full stack developer in startups and then going on to being the guy who's responsible for the AWS configs and everything. Obviously that must have started somewhere, right? What first inspired you to get into comp sci and the world of technology?
Well, I mean, I've been playing with with technology since I was a kid, and it was very natural for me. Like even though I was thinking about going into law school, but and then I ended up because I always wanted to create something, and I believe like the best way to when you want to create something for the current era or current world, I believe it's easiest to create something in the software industry. That's something that can have a huge impact, and so that's why I chosen to to go study and to go study computer science, and then I naturally evolved into my computer science career. I've started as a front end developer doing some basic front end stuff with frameworks like Angular, and then I've gradually moved to back end, and then as I mentioned, I've moved to doing the DevOps in infrastructure.
Yeah. Very nice. And I mean, was that a forced decision that ended up with you in DevOps and infrastructure, or is that because you picked up a particular interest in it? Would you say?
Well, I wouldn't say I wouldn't say it's I wouldn't say DevOps is fun. It just you do it because just because you must. But yeah, it was more or less a forced decision. But so yeah, I was the only one that agreed on doing it. But since they're like almost like it's very hard to find like experienced DevOps professionals on the market. And so when you're working on a company and you're like you can't get your stuff to users because nobody knows how to deploy it, then it's better to bite the bullet and just do stuff that you don't like. But what I've from my experience, like developers hate doing DevOps, and so yeah, it was also like my case. But I hated it the least, so yeah, I ended up doing it.
That's quite an origin. I hated it the least, so I ended up doing it.
Yeah.
I know what you mean because it is interesting. So I mean, I'm a pretty front end heavy guy in terms of what I do, and I always admire how people that do DevOps are able to shoulder the responsibility that comes with it. Really, like to give an example. I mean, I hope it's not still down because this isn't due to be released for a number of weeks. But over the weekend, my platform started Grad Jobs, which is a way for people to be connected with jobs at startups. It went down completely because of something completely out of my control. Two dependencies didn't play nice with each other, and the whole authentication service went down. So anyone who wanted to post a job, manage their account, anything like that, including new signups, they couldn't do anything. And it was a pretty horrible experience, actually, knowing that I was actually completely powerless. And I realized that new companies had signed up to post jobs on there, and I didn't realize that they weren't even able to post their jobs because I hadn't set the monitoring up, which is another lesson in of itself. Um,
Yeah.
and it's just I have a lot of respect for people in the DevOps side of things because it's a lot of pressure. But I suppose that maybe inspired you to create Stacktape, right? Because that deals with
Yeah.
it abstracts a lot of the complexities.
And so you've mentioned that you forgot to or just didn't set up the monitoring part, and that's one thing that's very hard for people that are not doing DevOps for a long time, because it's hard. Like, you don't know what you don't know. So yeah, so I've had like several talks about these talks that. Their title was like a production grade cloud application checklist, when I basically try to explain like everything that production grade application that's deployed in the cloud like, needs to have. And so yeah, monitoring is one of them, but there are also like other stuff that people like don't consider before they jump into it. And so like yeah, and then then people learn it the hard way, like when you come like when you have some sort of issue or a problem, then when you discover it only then yeah, you're yeah, it's not a very good situation to be in. And yeah, so basically, what we try to do at Stacktape is basically bridge the gap between DevOps and developers, and basically make the DevOps on AWS like a 97% easier, so that any developer can do it. And yeah, so and basically everything you configure using Stacktape is production grade by default, so you don't need to think about things like configuring, like setting up monitoring or like logging and observability and all this stuff. You don't need to think about the security. We basically give it the least privileged permissions that it needs to have. It's also like scalable by default. It's fault tolerant there, and these are all these different features that a production grade application needs to have. And it's also like you can configure everything in a way that's very cost efficient, and yeah, it's also very easy to be compliant when you need it with Stacktape. And yeah, so yeah, we just try to do as much things as possible behind the scenes, but we also don't like being like too high of an abstraction, such as basically when you think about it, like for example, platforms like Versal, they are like very easy to use, like very very great. Like the experience is great, but sometimes when you come into an issue, or like you need to do something more complicated or more complex, or like so like for example, I don't know, like connecting into a from another VPC, or connecting or doing just I would suggest some more advanced stuff. then you're very likely to find yourself in a position that you just can't do it, and you just need to switch the platform altogether. And so yeah, that's another thing that Stacktape tries to address, so that on one side we're trying to be as easy to use as possible, but on the other side we try to be as flexible as possible, so that you can do basically whatever. So yeah, with Stacktape, yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
it's an interesting question because I like it's a well, not even question. It's more of an interesting like problem in the sense of I love Vercel. I'm like a huge Vercel fanboy,
Yeah,
and I've deployed everything on it for years now. In fact, before since it was called Zeit, I think,
yeah,
and it's it is great. Obviously, like everything, it has its limitations, and you're always battling the spectrum between having the full customize being able to fully customize everything but the workload of having to do that in your cloud provider and then having it all managed for you, but having less customization. And then you end up with the issues of like, time is an economic unit in terms of like, could the opportunity cost of me working on something else? So then do I just do this all on some kind of provider? Oh, but then I could build my custom solution so I'm more efficient in the future. It's a difficult question and it comes into the economics of it really is quite interesting in terms of how you allocate your time and resources. So it's interesting because I guess you're trying to position Stacktape on that covers a wide part of that spectrum, which is quite a good place to be.
yeah. I mean, like I believe like it's about abstraction that you create, or like just finding the right amount of abstraction.
Mm.
So like because like like a lot of time you can get like 90% of the benefits for just 10% of the costs, and that's basic like what we're trying to do, just to automate it only to a point that that doesn't like require us to make like or just that doesn't require us to uh, basically take away the flexibility from you, and make it like not configurable, you know.
Yeah, because it's Pareto's law, isn't it? Like a minority
Yeah,
of the input produces the majority of the output, and
yeah,
I guess it's about fully discovering what that high quality input is and how
yeah.
you can capitalize on it.
In fact, like we've I believe like when we were developing Stacktape, I believe we changed our the configuration, our API, which is the configuration. We changed it like like hundreds of times, and we were like trying to figure out like what the right amount of abstraction is in for every use case. And then we're like, okay, like maybe this is too complicated because our like beta users didn't understand it, or like, okay, this is too restrictive, we should allow people to do this and this. And then just finding it's just like very iterative process, and it's very hard to get right. But hopefully we've come to a point when where basically like both sides are happy. Even like the people that are have more like DevOps experience that are using Stacktape are basically happy with the choices that we've made, and also the developers that are trying to use it are happy with it and understand like what it does and how to use it easily.
Yeah, and something I'm conscious of is that we've already done that classic developer thing of where we've started chatting jargon to each other and
Sure.
talking about the advantages, disadvantages. We're throwing out different provider names, and I'm conscious of the fact there's actually some fairly inexperienced people that'll be listening to this. Maybe haven't broken into their first role in tech yet, and cloud is one of those things that it seems almost like the last mystery that you have to conquer to get into your first job. And I certainly didn't have a full understanding of what it was when I broke into the industry. I mean, in simple terms, like what would you say the advantages of using cloud provider? I mean, obviously here most commonly AWS. What's the advantages of it, and why would developers want to consider it?
Well, basically, like, cloud is a I would call it maybe a buzzword, because like basically just
Yeah.
cloud is just basically using somebody else's server, that is somebody else's server that he runs. And maybe it's hard to explain to people that didn't run their own servers, because like only like when you when you experience the struggles that led to these huge cloud providers being developed, only then you fully understand like what is it good for. But basically like before, like some time ago, like people had to they had like physical servers, they needed to manage it. And like when you need to have like multiple servers, just because you have a redundancy, so that when one server goes down, like the whole system stays up. Just configuring these in like you basically need to create your own data center, and then the people gradually starting making an abstraction on it, so just so that they can use it easier. Basically, this was something that was called like infrastructure as a code, and from there it evolved to to different multiple different offerings, such as like platform as a service, uh, and yeah, it's and so like the abstraction went up, and then I believe like in 2006 AWS came in with like certain like services, and then they basically offered like a managed services. For example, EC2, which is like you have like a virtual computer in the cloud. You just click on a button and it creates like the dedicated server for you, and basically AWS or the cloud provider is responsible for running it, and they basically offer certain you know certain promises about its availability, and yeah, when you want to have like higher availability, you need to have still like multiple servers. But so the advantages is the advantage, like the hugest the biggest advantage is that you don't need to run your servers on your own. But yeah, since then, like a lot of different AWS has created multiple different services on top of that, and like the level of abstraction that AWS offers goes always up. And so, for example, like now you don't need to run your EC2 instances, which is like which are the virtual servers. You can leverage a more managed offering. So basically, just send your container or like just a Docker file somewhere, and everything just gets built and runs on an infrastructure that you don't need to care about or understand like anything. So it's basically about just worrying about less things. And even though like sometimes people, they think like, okay, like it's a this is not so complicated. I can do it on my own. I've set it up I've set it up everything up on my own local machine. So why should I pay to AWS for this? And like, or like people think like it's very expensive, but a lot of times what they don't get is that just running something on a developer machine, it's usually it's not that complicated. But when it needs to run in production, it needs like a lot of different a lot of other aspects. That there are a lot of other aspects that you need to solve, and these these tend to be very complicated, and you don't know it before you get to know them.
Yeah, it's ridiculously powerful, and I think people once they start using, they really get the use case. And there's all kinds of things like if suddenly you have a rush of users, it's so much easier to do that, to have it managed in a cloud provider than going out getting a load of new servers, configuring them, setting them up, and as you mentioned, Dockerizing your applications and just deploying them, even just stuff like that. People don't realize as juniors, and I'm saying this because I learned to code when everything was basically cloud native. We often don't realize that actually, like as soon as you hit npm run start on like a React application, you're running your own server, and that's you're
Yeah.
essentially just renting out space elsewhere for it to run. And it's actually my conspiracy theory here, and I always say this on the podcast, and listeners are probably sick of this. I think there's a conspiracy to make things sound more complicated than they actually are. Sometimes with things like AWS, so that consultants can charge can charge to go into large corporates and fix the problems. So I always wonder if there's something going on there. I don't know. I don't know if you I don't know if you agree or if you think I'm a bit mad for thinking that.
Well, mm, I mean, to be honest, I don't really agree with that, because like
Mhm.
yeah, I have another a conspiracy of my own, which is that a lot of consultants are trying to sell you the most complicated way to do things. For example,
Yeah, that's more what I
they
mean. Yeah,
they
yeah,
they basically
yeah.
like you like they want you to use Kubernetes because like mm, they tell you like how great it is, like, and like they tell you all about all its great features, but even though like you don't need those features at all. And yeah, so that's my conspiracy. But in fact, I believe like AWS is very complicated, and basically any like everyone I know like try to do any like even like the most basic of stuff on AWS wasn't really happy with it. I mean like, and then I don't want to to blame AWS for it, because the service is great, but imagine like they have like 200 or more than 200 different services. Then they need to communicate with each other, and even like they have like a very like good foundation. For example, like IAM, like which are the every service inside AWS, they need to communicate with each other. They need IAM permissions to do it, and like IAM is like very complicated, and people a lot of times they rant about it, like how like why do I need to do this, and like just write I don't know, like 10 lines of configuration, or just to make it all work, and you're just trying to figure out like which permissions you need to give and stuff like this. But yeah, but in fact, like when you need to do something more complicated, then you value like what IAM is capable of. So yeah, since like AWS offers so much, then yeah, it's like just natural that the complexity is very high, and that's why a lot of people are offering different abstractions over AWS, and yeah, that's why even like Stacktape exists.
Yeah, no, that's understandable. I think I'd probably rephrase what I originally said about my conspiracy now that
Yeah,
I think of it, in the sense of higher level concepts are sometimes overcomplicated. Like the word cloud, for instance,
yeah,
makes it sound
yeah,
like magic. So I don't know if we talked about this on our introduction call before the show, but I used to be a technical recruiter, and that's partly why I started the show, because I figured, oh, I've got some experience on both sides of the table, so I can give some advice. And the word cloud mystified me so much as a technical recruiter. And I would ask candidates what what it meant, and they'd just be, oh, it's just a Linux server, and I still didn't really know what that meant. Uh, and then eventually, if someone had just told me, oh, you're basically renting a computer
yeah.
that you connect to on the internet, yeah, stuff like that is yeah, that's what I think sometimes they overcomplicate it to sell to people in terms of like bigging it up a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you about the complexity of AWS, because yeah, I can say for sure that every time I've tried to set up stuff manually within AWS, it's been really, really tricky, to be honest. And I'm not afraid to admit that, because, as I said earlier, I'm definitely not a 10x engineer. So when I try and set things up manually or do things the right way, that's why I end up defaulting to some kind of managed servers, which is why I'm such a Vercel fanboy
Yeah.
for my front end stuff specifically, and that's why I've always used it for a long time. And yeah, that's as you say, that's why Stacktape exists. I mean, in terms of a typical use case for it, like say someone like me who maybe develops a lot of Next.js applications. In fact, actually, even easier, my job search platform for startups. It's deployed with Next.js, and then it's on Vercel, and the database and stuff relies on Supabase. How could pretty typical 2023 stack like that, how could it benefit from Stacktape? Like, say you took over the project from me now and migrated it to Stacktape. What how could you improve it and make it more secure, more robust, and perhaps prevent it going down like it did this weekend?
Well, so yeah, I will start by saying that I believe the biggest advantage would be that it would be way cheaper, because in fact like
Mm.
Vercel is very expensive, especially at scale, and AWS is even like though it's not like not cheap, but it's still like way cheaper than Vercel is, and the second advantage would be that. With Stacktape, you don't need to use them on two different services, Universal and Supabase. You can basically use Stacktape for everything. So yeah, Stacktape basically just to uh, elaborate some more. Like we support like I believe like 30 different services. Then you can deploy very easily using Stacktape. And so basically, what you do, just write some like a very simple and developer friendly configuration. So for example, you just write like a 5 to 10 lines of configuration to deploy a web service that is scalable, and you just point Stacktape to your source code, and Stacktape takes care about taking your source code, turning it into a uh, runnable artifact, which is basically a Docker image or a Lambda artifact. Like it depends like on like what you want to deploy, and then you just type Stacktape deploy to your console, and it gets deployed to the cloud. And so basically the application that you've mentioned, that would be like I don't know, like maybe like 30 lines of Stacktape configuration, and then you would be able to deploy it every time, just all together, like front to deploy front end together with your backend inside a single configuration file. So yeah, with Stacktape you can deploy just different applications. You can deploy the front ends, you can deploy the backend, the APIs. You can use services like, as I mentioned, like web service or a Lambda function. You can even use like batch jobs or a GPU accelerated jobs. And then you can deploy a lot of different stuff like Cognito user pool, which is like an authentication service.
Mm-hmm.
And you can deploy like like many databases, like like RDS, which is a relational or SQL databases. You can deploy MongoDB and Redis and all of these different AWS services. So yeah, I believe like, and that's another advantage that you would get, is that you can get and like easily deploy like a lot of different other services to to help you achieve like what you need. For example, like if you wanted to have the managed authentication, like you can use the Cognito service and stuff like this. And then like basically like when you decide you need to have a for example, you need to migrate from one database to another, because, for example, the scale of your application, like or the load gets big, and so, for example, you decided that the application would be better served by a NoSQL database such as MongoDB, then migrating from like from that SQL database that you have in Supabase to a MongoDB would be like very easy to do that migration if you are using Stacktape. Okay,
Yeah.
so
I was going to say actually a random one related to databases. So I've been discussing a lot recently about. I've recently moved camps, which is quite rare for a developer. I think I used to be huge on NoSQL, and now because of Postgres, I'm kind of into the relational SQL style of things now. Stacktape? I guess you got the freedom for both, so it doesn't matter. But for you, do you think there's particularly for anyone who's learning? Do you think there's a better one to learn?
well, I have a strong opinion on this. Yeah, you should always start with a relational database,
Mm-hmm.
because I believe like NoSQL databases, they just store this data in a different way, and it's more complicated to to do migrations or to like when you don't know like the schema, or that's just you don't know the data or basically you don't know the use case of your application ahead of time, because it can evolve. Then is a way better choice to choose a SQL database, because you can do migrations like a lot more easily. And but it also requires you to understand the data modeling part. So yeah, you just need to decompose everything. Yeah, it's some sort of a computer science concepts. It's I believe it's called something like third normal form, which basically you decompose the entities that you need to store in the database. But when you do it, then it's very convenient. You can basically query it as you wish, and you can do a lot of different stuff. Like as you can do joins, and you can query the database like however you want, which is a lot of times not the case with when you go for a NoSQL database, because, for example, some operations would require like a full database scan, which would be like very expensive to perform. And so basically you need to think about how you store the data ahead of time when you're using the uh, NoSQL database, because otherwise you're very likely to run into an issue of some sort.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because that confirms one of my opinions is that I see the value of NoSQL databases, of
Yeah.
course, but I really regret starting with them because I think it taught me really bad habits. It made it more complicated for me. And actually, when I started using relational stuff, it's suddenly a lot of the concepts were much easier to like. It's easier to really just get started with NoSQL because you don't have to conform to anything. But then, as soon as I think the thing was for me, as soon as I started working with a database of a significant size, it suddenly became really hard for me to understand properly. So yeah, I'm glad you said
Yeah.
that because I'm definitely far from a back end or database expert, but it's something I've changed my mind on quite strongly
Yeah,
recently.
it basically, yeah, it basically allows you to, just to skip the data modeling part, which is not easy. But when you skip that part, then a lot of time you come into a issue like, or you get to know like why it's so important to do, and why it's not such a good idea to skip it. You just you just basically move the problem to the future when you
Yeah.
when you skip that part.
It's like putting something on a credit card and then not thinking about paying it off. You know,
Yeah.
that's the analogy I'd use for it. That's what I find. And
But sorry,
actually,
anyway,
sorry,
sorry.
go on.
Anyway, I just wanted to mention that I like NoSQL databases, but
Mhm.
I believe like they have their use cases, and I believe like it's like you need to have a special use case for them. And I believe like a lot of different companies do have them because for example, they have like some sort of data that needs to be queried like very easily or cost efficiently, and then using a NoSQL database is a great choice because just to achieve all these different like ACID features of a relational database, yeah, it requires the database to do a lot of stuff that basically makes it you know sometimes slower and sometimes more expensive to run. And but for example, when you don't need some of those traits or features of these SQL databases, and you know that you don't need them, then sometimes it's way more efficient, or it's way better to run these workloads on a in a NoSQL database.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so something I was going to say as well earlier that I forgot to mention actually, and I wrote it down before we recorded, was that something I find quite cool about what you guys are doing with Stacktape is that a lot of the time these tools where you take an abstraction of cloud services, the way they're marketed is for people that really haven't touched cloud stuff at all before. Like Vercel, for example, I feel like it's not really designed for anyone that actually knows that much about the underlying services. Whereas with what you guys are doing, you can grab both sides of the market, which is cool because it can actually just make someone's life easier, even if they know a lot already, to be able to just do a quick custom configuration. Is what you said about doing then they can focus on that 10% that they want to do specialized, whereas 90% of the work can be done by you. I think that's interesting. I think we think about abstraction a lot in terms of making stuff easier for people that have never touched it before, but actually, there's a big market for making things simpler for tasks that people are very experienced in, and therefore don't need to dive down into tiniest things because they know kind of what they need to do. They just want to get it done quick.
Yeah, so yeah, basically, yeah, you can think of Stacktape more as a library and not the framework,
Mhm.
because just we just make these the hard things, we make them simpler. And but yeah, we just the talk about the abstractions is very complicated, because there are like a lot of people that have different preferences. But I believe like so for example, like when you have a 10 or like 5 to 10 people in your team, like a lot of them like have different preferences. Somebody would like to use this service, or like or which has like a higher amount of abstraction.
Mhm.
Somebody would like to dive deep into something like Terraform or Kubernetes and configure everything on their own. And I believe like a Stacktape is some sort of a sweet spot when you can make both sides happy, and both sides are productive, and allow to be also like a very productive, and to get the things to or get your software to market very fast, and at the same time stay like or have a lot of flexibility and power in terms of like what you can do and deploy, and also in terms of cost efficiency compared to platforms such as Heroku or a Versal.
Yeah, yeah, because then you can because instead of abstracting everything when it may not be totally necessary, you can abstract what you want to abstract, and then it's like the spectrum, like we
Yeah,
talked about earlier. It's interesting.
and also like I believe like so you just so there are like a lot of different types of complexity. And so, for example, like one type of complexity is the configurational complexity, which, for example, like with when you're using something like Kubernetes or Terraform or
Hmm.
even like CloudFormation, yeah, you need to write like a lot of thousands of lines of configuration just to just to deploy a simple application. There's this production grade,
Yeah,
has everything that it needs to have. So that's one part of the complexity, and there's also like conceptual complexity. So, for example, like to in order to deploy a production grade application on AWS, you would need to understand like what a security group is, or you would need to understand a lot of concepts behind networking and stuff. And so yeah, that's another type of complexity that we're trying to eliminate. And yeah, and what's left? These are like very simple things that that you don't need to that you can basically learn how to stack tape over like I don't like few hours, or just and
hmm
to be an expert in it, because like every concept or every uh, just every service that Stacktape offers is like very easily and very intuitive to use.
yeah. And I think especially the big one is people when they realize they can abstract their authentication. I think that's always the first thing I look for
Yeah,
with anything. Like that's always the scariest thing is because I just don't trust myself. So whatever I'm doing, it will be authenticated. So
yeah,
do you say it's Cognito that Stacktape uses for that?
yeah. And we also eat our own dog food. Just
Yeah.
we use Stacktape to deploy Stacktape, and we store our clients in a Cognito database, or the Cognito user pool. So yeah, I also wouldn't wouldn't trust myself to everything, because that's like being secure. It's not like you configure everything to be secure and you're secure for for infinite amount of time. The threats are evolving, and so you need to stay up to date. And I don't want to be the one that's responsible for staying up to date with the most recent threats and trying to mitigate them. I want somebody else to take care of it for me, so I just don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, exactly. These things just aren't worth the because it's not even a time question at that point. It's just the fact that something could happen very quickly, or there could be some small thing that you're not aware of. A 0 day, like the sort of things that back in the day would have kept people up at night. I mean, to be fair, maybe it didn't because there have been so many companies that have been caught saving passwords in plain text
Yeah, yeah.
and that kind of thing. But yeah, just the thought of having things like that just taken away for me and just allowing a service that knows what it's doing to look after that, whereas I can concentrate on anything else. That allows me to have a good night's sleep and actually ship useful features.
Yeah, and basically that's basically what also like Stacktape is doing. Like, you don't need to worry about like some misconfiguration being responsible for your production server going down and then stuff like this. So yeah, it just works by default, and it works in a way that's production ready, and you don't need to worry about. But yeah, you can also have this benefit with something like Versal, but these these services. Yeah, but when your traffic spikes on something like Verso, then yeah, on one hand you're like happy, like, yeah, I'm getting users, so yeah, that's great. But now then you look at the bill and you're like, all right, and I'm also paying for these users.
Yeah, it is one thing that I'm dreading as someone who currently runs a production app on Vercel. Like
Yeah,
the day that if it goes viral, great, but I do worry a little bit about the cost when that does happen. So it's something that I definitely need to consider going forward in the future. And I mean, speaking of the future, uh, there's almost no debate about the cloud going away because it's apart from one very notable person very recently, who I'm
yeah,
sure you saw,
yeah,
a
sure,
certain creator of Ruby on Rails,
yeah,
saying that
sure.
he's moving off the cloud, which I thought was an interesting article, but I just thought he's obviously a smart guy, but I mean. I thought he didn't take into account the fact that time is money. And like, yes, he did save money on the bills, but like, you want to take into account the engineers that you're paying for and the infrastructure and, the physical infrastructure in that case and everything like that. I mean, yeah, did you check out the article
Yeah,
about
yeah,
the
I
moving
did.
base camp?
I'm
Yeah.
to be honest, like when I was pitching Stacktape to a lot of my friends, like a lot of them like were like, oh, like can you like, just develop it already? I want I want to use it. But some of them they were like. Like why would I need the use to a stack tape? I can do it on my own. I want to, just it's expensive because I don't want to use this AWS service. I will just run my workloads on the cheapest virtual machine in the cloud, and I can do everything myself. And to be honest, I believe like this approach a lot of times works for them because like our works for certain companies or for certain scale because when a company like such as the uh, the one that you've mentioned or the certain creator of Ruby on Rails works for or just owns yeah I believe like they definitely have a lot of very competent people that know how to run people or just basically just create a data center or just just wire everything together. So in that case you can go for it, you can save a lot of money. But how many companies do have this expertise to just configure everything and and have the confidence to do it because that's you need to know a lot of stuff to in order to do that. So yeah, I mean like if you have like a 30 to 50 competent engineers that can create it and run it, then yeah, go ahead. And but if you don't, I believe like you better to stay in the cloud, even though like when a lot of people see the AWS's margins or their revenue, they're like, wow, that's it's so costly, and they're just making so much money. But yeah, they're making the they're making so much money because the service they created is just yeah, it's incredible. Sometimes when I'm thinking about like how much effort or like work that needed to go into creating AWS, it's just it's incredible. Like it's incredible that they can still operate it and just and it's also incredible that it's not buggy like when
Hmm.
there's such a huge system. Then it's like you can think of something like Windows or I don't know something that is like so buggy. And there's like these huge different like systems are very buggy, but AWS isn't. Like I mean, like from time to time I encounter some bug or something, but it's very reliable. It's incredible, in fact.
Yeah, and do you know what? Talking of interesting articles as well, did you check that one out about AWS? They're moving away from microservices towards monolith, not AWS, Prime. Well, I suppose same organization, Prime Video,
Yeah.
under Amazon's umbrella, which makes you think of the scale of the organization that they're releasing new stuff.
Yeah.
But what did you think of it?
Well, I believe like I'm somewhere in the middle. Like there are like a lot of people advocating for moving away from serverless because the event-driven side of it it's just complicated and it's costly and stuff like this. And there were like people saying like, oh no, just it's just a very bad use case for serverless, and you just shouldn't use it for this service for these types of services. And yeah, I'm somewhere in the middle. Just to be honest, I believe like using serverless or by serverless I mean like using Lambda functions to run a lot of your workloads and to use an event-driven architecture. It's a great idea in a lot of cases, like especially when you need to scale fast and up and down very fast, or when your application is very small and you just don't need to continually run some sort of server. But when your load gets high, such as when you're such as when you're running Amazon Prime, then yeah, obviously you care about the costs. And the truth is that when the Lambda functions like they are just more expensive like per computing unit. The thing is that you a lot of times you still end up paying less, even though it's like more costly for the per
Hmm.
computing unit, because when you're not using these computing units like then you're using only the amount of computation that you actually need. And yeah, you're not like having an idle server running. and yeah, so I believe like it has the every approach has its pros and cons, and I believe that's why having an easy way to switch between them is a good idea, and basically that's also like what Stacktape offers you. So yeah, basically deploying a container using Stacktape, it's the configuration is very similar to deploying a Lambda function, and so yeah, you can switch between them, and you can basically see what works and what doesn't. And then also like there was like one thing that I believe like a lot of people don't take into account, and it's that yeah, like people say that just that, you take your code and you run it on a lambda function, or as a lambda function, that you just take the code and upload it to the cloud, and it runs. But in fact it's not that easy, to, because there's a reason like why Docker exists, and like why a lot of there are a lot of different tools that try to make packaging of these applications easier using Docker. For example, like projects such as Peg, or like this Paketo build pegs and stuff like this. And nothing like this exists in the serverless world. So there's like there's like certain frameworks. They have their own ways of deploying Lambda functions, with all of their dependencies and everything that they need. But like this, in like the serverless ecosystem in this regard is still lacking. And so like yeah, we in Stacktape we are trying to create this packaging engine that basically takes your lambda function code, it strips it of every unnecessary file that doesn't need to be there, and include all of the dependencies, and also like build it for the platform that it will run on, which is the Amazon Linux behind the scenes. And yeah, no, just try to help with this, because as it turns out, it's a lot more complicated than you can imagine when you can't use these off the shelf different like build packs that, for example, like a Heroku offers. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it is certainly. It was an interesting read, that article, and although something it did make me wonder was maybe someone had configured something wrong for it to be 90% cheaper to move to the monolith. Definitely raised my eyebrows a little bit. I thought perhaps the architecture. I mean, I'm not trying to say that I'm a better architect than the people at Amazon, but it was an interesting one. But yeah, it's yet another case for allowing these things to be abstracted a little bit, I think.
Yeah. And like, I'm, to be honest, like I'm not a huge fan of microservices. I believe like
Mhm.
this is one of these things that were as we've talked about before, that was heavily recommended by consultants. Then
Yeah.
and then yeah, no, you start using microservices, and then you realize like, okay, like this is this is very complicated, and I might need this consultant that recommended it to me, and yeah, I need I need to ask him several questions, because you're not just doing observability, or just this communication between these services is very complicated. You need to think about like what happens when some service is not available, like what happens then. A lot of times you need to use different queues for communication, such as Kafka or something, and that yeah, there's just a huge amount of things there's just a huge amount of added complexity when you want to run these microservices. And that's also like what might be that could also be the thing that makes it 10 times more expensive than when running a monolith. So yeah.
Yeah. And do you think in 5 years, more people will be checking the management console every day or less? Because not because they're setting up huge server towers in their office, but because they're perhaps moving towards tools of abstraction like Stacktape, like Vercel, like Superbase.
Well, I believe like like more and more people will be using these abstractions. I mean, the thing is like I've checked like some time ago, there was a statistic that said like the DevOps people, or like the people that know how to configure infrastructure, are in the highest demand, like amongst all of these
Mm,
different professions in the world. Because as I mentioned, like not a lot of people like to configure stuff or run stuff or being responsible for running your your workloads in the cloud or running them at all. So yeah, there's like such a huge shortage of these DevOps people, and I believe the gap between the ones that companies need and the actual amount of those people, it will get huge or bigger over time, not smaller. So I believe there's a huge a lot of room for these kind of tools, and so I believe their usage will just get higher. And yeah, I believe like the one thing that is hurting the adoption is that people don't trust or they trust just certain companies, even
Mm.
when Heroku started, like not all of people were trusting them to to run their workloads without issues. But yeah, when they get the credibility and the trust, then they took off and just started using and people started using these tools. So yeah, I believe like we need to wait and when people just get to know like more and more of these tools and they gain trust. I believe like there will be a boom in with these tools, and people will forget about using tools like these lower level tools such as Terraform or Kubernetes. I mean, like they will understand that there is some Terraform or Kubernetes under the hood, but they won't need to directly interact with it. And that's true for I believe like for most applications, but like there definitely are applications that are so complicated and so complex that you just need to have the power to configure them on your own. So I'm not saying like the DevOps jobs are going away, but I'm just saying that like for a lot of different use cases, it just won't make sense to configure everything on your own and just take something that's already built and works.
Yeah, particularly if your company's in a very high growth phase as well. Like it does seem, I like to really keep in touch with startups, not just because of the job platform I'm running, but also as well just in Twitter. I really love seeing journeys both on the business side and the technical side of high growth companies, and everyone does seem to be running their own, not running their own, sorry, to be getting their own abstraction in on whatever platform that is,
Yeah.
rather than having to do everything themselves. So it just makes sense. Like it's again comes back to that question of opportunity cost. Like if you can get most of what you need done via abstraction with very little effort. I mean, you said like what was it, maximum 30 to 50 lines of configuration for Stacktape. Like
Well,
ultimately, if that saves you hundreds of hours, yeah.
I mean, for a typical applications, which is basically on a backend which consists of like some like web service and in the relational database, and then it runs some sort of front end, either as a as a React application, just statically built as a single page application, or a Next.js website deployed also as a web service. Then yeah, you just need you just need 30 lines of configuration for that. Yeah, and
Yeah.
yeah, now go ahead.
I was going to say as well, like if people do want to try it out, like is there an easy way to give it a go? Because I actually am going to try out Stacktape on. I have this idea that's been annoying me for a while, actually about podcast discovery. And I'm not just saying this because I have a podcast, but I find it really hard to discover good podcasts. So I want to create a service. The only thing is I can't figure out how to monetize it, but I want to create a service where people can submit their favorite podcasts, and then it churns out recommendations for them based on what other people like, and then it boosts podcasts. Maybe there's like almost like product hunt for podcasters basically. I might just operate it maybe with like a donation box or something, because I just can't figure out how
Yeah.
I would cover the cost. But I'm thinking I'll use Stacktape for that. So if someone wants to build a project like that using Stacktape, is what's the best thing to do? Is it check out your documentation, or is there anything else they should do?
Well, I believe like you can just go to stacktape.com. You just sign up for Stacktape. You connect your AWS account, and you can we have basically like, a lot of different starter projects. So you can choose for example, like we have like a starter project for example like a Flask API or an Express.js API, or even like a Java Spring Boot API. Then we have starter projects for like for front end. Front ends, for example, like such as Next.js or like just React application or Vue applications. So you just take these starter projects, and then they're basically like ready to go. So you can deploy these, or you can just configure everything on your own. And yeah, so I believe like basically any use case you have, there's just a very slight chance that the stack table won't be able to handle it for you. So
Very nice. And if people want to keep in touch with you as well, what's the best way?
Well, I have a they can reach me at Twitter. It's my handle is yeah, I believe we can include it after the just yeah, we can include it later, I believe.
Yeah, I'll pop that in the description. But
Okay, cool.
yeah, thanks so much for joining me today. It was really interesting chat. I mean, certainly, as I said earlier, I'm definitely far from an expert with the cloud, so I've already learned a ton today. And yeah, looking forward. I'm really looking forward to trying out Stacktape for this podcast project actually. So I'll let you know how it goes, and hopefully you don't see any crashes or like anything like that because of something I've done.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I'll let you know how it goes, and I'll let the listeners know how it goes as well.
yeah. Great. Was happy to be here and to tell you more about Stacktape. And yeah, I'm looking for you to try it. And if you have any questions, just reach out to me, and yeah, I can help.
Brilliant, cool. And thanks again to the listeners for tuning in. So if you want to hear more, go to stacktape.com. And thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Coder Career.